So when we talk about this, we have to mention the embargoes. There's a reason why for 29 years in a row, the UN and every other country who's a part of it have voted to stop this. There's a reason. It is a humanitarian issue. And every single country agrees, the exception being the United States and Israel. That's it. So if you want to say, like, you know how that meme is going around all over the place right now? You know, the Eric Andre meme, like, why would socialism do this? It is partially true. Like, the United States absolutely trying to destroy other countries and prevent them from participating in global economic trade, while at the same time preventing other countries from having any ability to do imports or exports with those nations, yes, directly results in them failing. I want to talk to you about a horrifying event, one that is taking place and one that has had, obviously, the eyes of the world looking upon it. This is something that is obviously incredibly troubling, and it makes sense that America has taken a very firm and strong position on this issue, as they should, as they really should. This is something that is horrifying, and it's not an exaggeration to call it a genocide, okay? You know exactly what I'm talking about, of course. I'm talking about Myanmar and the Rohingya genocide that's taking place. It's a series of ongoing persecutions by the Myanmar military of the Muslim Rohingya people. The genocide consists of two phases. The first was a military crackdown that occurred from October 2016 to 2017. This, of course, is such a national tragedy that the United States took a very firm stance on this immediately, and they've begun, I believe, a military intervention of some kind, because they will not stand by. They will not stand by as people are persecuted, and that's what the U.S. does. The U.S. is an arbiter of freedom around the world, and when something bad is happening somewhere, they're going to be there. They're going to put a stop to it. It doesn't matter, all right? It doesn't matter if it's in Xinjiang. It doesn't matter if it's Myanmar. The U.S. is there. They are there, and they're there to help. They're there to help people on the ground. So I'm just going to search for what Obama did. Oh. Okay, well, maybe I'll search for what Trump did, because Trump... No. Okay, well, maybe Biden. Biden did... That's weird, because this one's definitely a genocide. There's no controversy about that. There's strange. It's weird though, because I was told that the United States is an arbiter for freedom and justice, and they don't stand by when there's inequalities happening around the world. They even make tweets. I mean, there's that's weird. That's odd. It could be just maybe it's a goof. Maybe you know what this is. You know what this is. This is probably just the Wikipedia page hasn't been updated. But certainly, like, what if I take out the world? I'll just look up the United States. Okay, 4 results. There we go. It constitutes a genocide under international human rights laws. That's right. British Prime Minister Theresa May and United States Secretary Rex Tillerson described the situation as ethnic cleansing. Okay, so they're aware of it. So what did they do? Direct sanctions against the Burmese military and penalties for firms that do business and companies linked to it, as replaced by the United States and other countries in the past, have been suggested as the best response to the violence. But they haven't done that yet. Okay. Well, it's coming. What else? Other protests. Oh, there were protests by Americans. Wait, additional protests were held in the same month in Washington, D.C.? Okay. And what else? Oh, that's it. Oh, that's all. Weird. This is unusual, because again, I was led to believe that the United States is this arbiter for truth and justice. And American exceptionalism is what is basically cleansing the world of all the baddies. But it seems like there's radio silence on this issue. Well, never mind. They've got more important things to worry about. They've got to worry about Cuba. We're going to talk about Cuba. Let's bring up the real.
Delivery service, Cuban style. This family-owned business is giving Cubans living abroad an alternative way to help their relatives on the island. Economic sanctions imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump have complicated remittances to Cuba and that's why sending food instead has become popular.
We have a weekly package that is what Cubans need the most. A few years ago, we started to work with companies that promote our services. Relatives abroad can send a gift to their families here. They can send sweets and basic items.
While the service is offered in US dollars and paid for through the United States, the food is served in Cuba. Rice, beans and pork are a traditional meal for the holidays that Daniel Torres wants to share with his family in Havana on his birthday. He paid for the service online.
There are lots of problems with food scarcity and the limitations of moving cash, and this service allows us to send food and I pay for it from abroad. I am very happy with this.
Economic restrictions imposed by the US have banned wiring money to Cuba. More than 400 Western Union offices have closed in recent months.
This is a good service for us because in the middle of the pandemic it allows those who live abroad to send food and other items, which is what people need.
US sanctions and Cuba's economic troubles have worsened people's lives on the island. Shortages of food and basic items have again become a common problem. People have to line for hours in order to get them. Cuban President
I was told that it was communism, that communism did all the bad things. Well, it's probably a mix. There's gonna be a mix.
President Miguel Díaz-Canel announced he will eliminate a complicated dual currency system that has prevailed for decades. It will result in a steep devaluation. People on the island are fearing the consequences. Ricardo Torres says the months ahead will be difficult.
It's a big transformation starting in January 1st. There is a complete overhaul in prices, salaries, subsidies, and the government aims at introducing a new set of incentives for state companies, forcing them to increase efficiency, to increase productivity, also to increase exports.
In the meantime,
okay, so this was a little while ago. I mean, some things have changed. I know that Obama obviously gets a lot of flack from lefties, right? Lefties are always like, well, Obama was terrible, okay? He was worse than every dictator that ever happened. And drones and Obama was just the worst thing we ever had. But I will give Obama one thing, in that Obama did try to improve relations between Cuba and America. Obviously did not go nearly far enough, but he did at least remove, and he did do this, he did remove Cuba from the lists of countries that were promoting terrorism, which goes a very, very long way. That is a decidedly good thing. Unfortunately, in the old swinging pendulum of American politics, we got Donald Trump afterwards. And I know for some reason, there's some corners of the left that seem to think that Obama didn't really care about foreign interventionism. Trump didn't really care about foreign interventionism. Trump was way more concerned about domestic things. And he was a nationalist. He was a proud nationalist. So he wasn't really concerned with global politics. He unfortunately ramped up sanctions on Cuba way worse than his predecessor, which has led to even more deplorable things with that country.
In April 2015, President Barack Obama finally removed Cuba from the list of countries that support terrorism. This move, along with a mutual agreement by the US and Cuba to discuss improved relations, is a big step toward lifting the half-century-long embargo against the communist island. Here's a timeline to help better understand the...
Do I actually think these people did anything, or just following the advice of their CIA advisors? Which people? Are you talking about people on the ground in Cuba?
Cuba embargo. 1959, Fidel Castro leads an invasion of Cuba, instituting himself as a communist dictator. The following year, the Cuban government takes over all U.S. business.
Do I actually think Obama did anything, or did Trump do anything? Yes, Trump added new sanctions on Cuba. I believe almost 200 new sanctions on Cuba, which has resulted in them, I believe, being financially strangled. I think estimated to the tune of like $20 billion on the country. So yes, I think he absolutely did. And yes, it is true that Obama removed Cuba from the list of countries that support terrorism and tried to soften relationships between the two countries. Those are entirely factually based statements.
This is in Cuba. In response, President Dwight D. Eisenhower cuts off relations with Cuba and institutes a presidential proclamation to block exports. President John F. Kennedy and the CIA attempt a...
Trump is just watching TV all day. He can't govern for shit. Yeah, I mean, no matter how you want to paint this, at the end of the day, those sanctions still got sanctioned. Like they're not made up. I I don't know like what side of the left you're coming from here, but it was still detrimental to the Cuban people, even if you think it was sorcery or something.
Failed invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. The CIA also orchestrates a number of plots to assassinate Fidel Castro, but none succeed. The USSR sends nuclear missiles to Cuba, prompting the Cuban Missile Crisis.
By the way, all those sanctions have not been taken down by Biden. So, while Biden didn't exactly impose these new sanctions, he didn't do anything to change it.
Kennedy orders a total economic embargo, including travel and imports on Cuba. After decades of stalemate, Cuba shoots down 2 U.S. aircrafts. The U.S. passes the Helms-Burton Act, which makes the embargo official U.S. law instead of a presidential proclamation. President Bill Clinton eases parts of the Cuban embargo, allowing food, medicine, and humanitarian supplies. Later, he allows Cuban Americans to send money to their families and lifts certain travel restrictions. The U.S. Secretary of State lists Cuba as an axis of evil country for reportedly attempting to develop biological weapons. President George W. Bush increases sanctions on Cuba, restricting travel and money transfers. Fidel Castro's brother, Raul, takes over as president of Cuba. President Obama lifts the Bush-imposed travel and money restrictions. Raul Castro and President Obama agreed to re-establish diplomatic relations after more than a year of secret talks involving Pope Francis. The new changes lift a number of restrictions on Cuba. President Obama removes Cuba from the list of sponsored terrorism countries. It seems that after decades of embargo, the relationship between Cuba and the United States is beginning to normalize. It appears to be only a matter of time until the two countries finally resolve their decades-long animosity. Cuba isn't the only country in Latin America that has a messy relationship with the United States. To learn about why Venezuela hates the U.S., check out our video here.
Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro, now vows to retaliate against the U.S. So what's behind this political strain? Why do Venezuela and the U.S. hate each other?
Thanks for watching TestTube, and please subscribe.
So that was, you know, before the Trump stuff came along. I'm not going to go through the entire embargo, but some things to note. Cuba has decided to make its own COVID-19 vaccines, but now needs syringes. Cuba, which says it's developed 5 COVID-19 vaccines candidates, apparently 2 of them are quite effective. However, they have not released the findings to the greater World Health Organization. As COVID-19 cases have spiked in recent weeks, the lack of syringes looms as a major challenge for the island, where a crushing recession has triggered a food crisis and shortage of medicine and basic necessities. Trump-era sanctions made it harder for Cuba to buy syringes from major manufacturers, which have already been swamped with orders from bigger, richer countries. Making matters much worse, some of Cuba's vaccines require 3 doses. The one that they claim is 93% effective requires 3 doses, meaning the Caribbean nation needs more syringes per capita than most countries, using the double shots made by Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and the single-dose jab by Janssen. Cuba is aiming to vaccinate all of Havana's 2 million population by September, with a total of 10 million people by the end of the year. When it became clear the island wouldn't manage on its own, aid organizations in the US and Europe sprang into action. They launched campaigns to collect donations to buy syringes and have shipped to the island the narrow deficit as many as 25 million syringes. The response in just a little over a month has been phenomenal, according to Global Health Partners, the New York-based NGO that's leading the Saving Lives campaign. Others in Spain, Italy, and Latin American nations like Argentina and Honduras have also contributed. Cubans living abroad launched campaigns in cities all over the world, and in Miami, a caravan against the U.S. embargo last month has collected local donations. All right, so let's fast forward to what is going on right now in the country. This video is shit and makes the situation seem as it's equal on both sides. One of the two countries. Oh, that video that I was showing you was 100% a liberal outlet. It's what we call propaganda. But here was the interesting thing about it. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a precursor and a taste of how relations were starting to soften a little bit under Obama, and then of course ramped up decidedly under Trump. Because again, for some reason, I don't know why a lot of people seem to think that the Trump administration, by the way, when I say things like Obama and I say things like Trump, I'm not talking about a single individual, okay? I'm talking about their administrations. So I'm talking about the Trump administration, the Trump doctrine, the Obama administration, the Obama doctrine, and how those things work, you know, or combined. Thousands of Cubans marched on Havana's Malecon Promenade and elsewhere on the island to protest against food shortages and high prices amid the coronavirus crisis, and one of Cuba's biggest ever anti-government demonstrations. Many young people took part in the protest on Sunday afternoon in the capital, which disrupted traffic until police moved in several hours and broke up the march. When a few protesters threw rocks, police initially trailed behind the protesters and chanted "Freedom, enough, unite." Cuba is going through its worst economic crisis in decades, along with the resurgence of coronavirus cases. It suffers the consequences of U.S. sanctions imposed by the Trump administration. An official in the Biden administration tweeted his support for Sunday's demonstrations because, of course, Cuba's Director General for U.S. Affairs, Carlos F. Di Cusio, dismissed her remarks in his own tweet. U.S. State Department and its officials involved to their necks in promoting social and political instability in Cuba should avoid expressing hypercritical concern for a situation that they have been betting on. Cuba is and will continue to be a peaceful country, contrary to the U.S. That is true. You don't hear a lot about, you know, Cuban imperialism. You don't really hear about Cuba being, you know, a great imperial overlord around the world. That being said, the country is not without its problems, and I've mentioned this before. A combination of the U.S. sanctions and their lack of tourism because of COVID has hit their economy quite powerfully. So these are, of course, the pro-government protests, which it's not really being reported on by the media, at least the mainstream media, but they were large and they were numerous. Alongside his depiction as a brutal dictator, negative reflections on Fidel Castro since his death on November 25th have focused on the mismanagement of the Cuban economy and the consequent extreme poverty suffered by ordinary Cubans. This character is problematic not only because it ignores the devastating economic impact of the United States embargo over 55 years, but also because it is premised on neoclassical economic assumptions. This means that by stressing economic policy over economic restraints, critics can shift responsibility for Cuba's alleged poverty onto Castro without implicating successive U.S. administrations that have imposed the suffocating embargo. This approach also ignores key questions about Cuba after the revolution. Where can medium to low income countries get the capital to invest in infrastructure and welfare provisions? How can foreign capital be obtained under conditions which do not obstruct such development? And how can a late developing country such as Cuba use international trade to produce a surplus in the global economy, which many claim tend to be unequal in terms of trade? It was the search for solutions to the challenge of the development that led to Cuba's revolutionary government to adopt a socialist system. They adopted a centrally planned economy in which state ownership predominated because they perceived the system as offering the best answer to these historical challenges. But the commitment to operate within a socialist framework implied additional restraints and complications, particularly in the context of the bipolar world. My book, Che Guevara and the Economics of Revolution, examines the contradictions and challenges faced by the nascent revolutionary government from the perspective of Guevara's role as the president of the National Bank and Minister of the Industries. Gross domestic product. Oh, wow. I didn't know this. They have been surging. Interesting. Following the revolution, Castro set out to bring social welfare and land reform to the Cuban people and to confiscate ill-gotten gains of the Cuban elite, but then the defeated Fulgencio Batista, the dictator, and his associates fled Cuba. They stole millions of pesos from the National Bank and the Treasury. The country was decapitalized, and severely limiting its capacity for public spending and private investments. Wealthy Cubans were leaving on the island, taking their deposits and taxes with them, and how the new government was going to carry out ambitious socioeconomic reforms without financial resources. We have to consider these real circumstances at every juncture. For example, when the U.S. embargo was first implemented, 95% of Cuba's capital goods and 100% of its spare parts were imported from the U.S., and the U.S. was overwhelmingly the main recipient of Cuban exports. When the Soviet bloc disintegrated, Cuba lost 85% of its trade and investment, leading the GDP to plummet 35%. These events produced serious economic constraints on Cuba's room for maneuver. Even factoring in its low GDP per capita, the Human Development Index lists Cuba as high human development. It excels not just in health and education, but also in women's participation and political inclusion. Cuba has eliminated child malnutrition. No child sleeps on the streets. In fact, there is no homelessness. Even during the hungry years of the economic crisis in the 1990s, Cubans did not starve. Cuba struck with the planned economy, and it enabled them to ration their scarce resources. Yes, salaries are extremely low, but Cuban salaries do not determine their standard of living. 85% of Cubans own their own homes. The rent cannot exceed 4% of the the tenant's income. The state provides a very basic food basket, while utility bills, transport, and medicine costs are kept low. The opera, cinema, ballet, and so are cheap for all. High-quality education and health care are free. They are part of the material wealth of Cubans and should not be dismissed, as if the individual consumption of consumer goods were the only measure of economic success. That's really important, by the way, because we've got this idea, and I think we've been like ingrained to think this way, based on just like American consumption, and we all live this way, right? Like I'm consuming, I'm producing consumption right now, and you're all consuming it. That's what's happening. Thanks for all your subs, by the way. You know, Polyglottopus. Can everyone go to twitch.tv/polyglottopus? Give her a follow. But they don't have the useless plastic kitchen gadgets to show they are happy. True. There's that. That's one thing. Yeah. Let's go to Jacobin. Sanctions are like war. They may not instantly shred flesh the way bombs and bullets do, but they kill and maim nonetheless. Subjecting to such cruelties is indefensible in ordinary times. In the pre-COVID-19 world, America's economic warfare was killing cancer patients in Iran, keeping Syrian children with cancer from getting necessary medicines, and according to the estimates by 2 U.S. economists, killing perhaps 40,000 Venezuelans. But collectively punishing the entire population during a global pandemic is perhaps even more ruthless form of barbarism. The coronavirus is ravishing Iran, but the country is reporting more than 20,000 cases and over 1,500 deaths. Prior to COVID-19, U.S. sanctions battered Iran's healthcare system, undercutting access to pharmaceuticals and necessities like cardiac pacemakers. In December, Eskandar Sadeghi Bourjerdi describes the sanctions as a collective punishment of over 81 million Iranians through and by the means of one of the most comprehensive and unrelenting sanction regimes in modern history. So here's the thing. When the United States is basically probably the largest imperial power that we have in the modern era, in human history, one might say, when they're exerting that power, you can't really push up against the US if they impose sanctions upon a country without being labeled as an enemy to the United States in the process. So if the United States says no one can do any business with Cuba, no one can do any business with Iran within certain conditions, then countries have to fall alongside those rules. That's basically how it works. So let's scroll past Yemen, past North Korea. Cuba, a nation that has been at the forefront of the coronavirus aid efforts, is also impacted. According to the United Nations, almost 60-year U.S. embargo has cost the island $130 billion. Over the last year, the United States has hit Cuba with some of the harshest measures in the decade of war on the nation, and in April, Washington instituted sanctions against tanker companies delivering petroleum to Cuba and Venezuela, severely damaging Cuba's agricultural sector. Now Cuba has its first coronavirus patients, and though it has a world-class healthcare system, its ability to cope has been stronger than the Trump administration's recent moves and not left it poorer. U.S. sanctions are also an important case for the public health crisis in Venezuela, crushing the economy, blocking the nation from exporting oil, freezing its global financial assets, and denying it access to international financial systems, contributing to a shortfall of $38 billion in the last 3 years. Quite simply, the sanctions regime is sentencing thousands to their deaths. These sanctions need to be lifted in the face of COVID-19 and should be uncontroversial humanitarian imperative. I completely agree. I completely agree, and that is probably going to be, going forward, what needs to be done.
The Trump administration has declared the most severe new sanctions against Cuba since President John F. Kennedy imposed an economic embargo on the island back in 1962. By enabling Title III of the Helms-Burton Act, the White House is allowing Americans, Cuban Americans, and US firms who had property nationalized by the Cuban government to take legal action against those benefiting from that property today. This hotel, built in the 1950s by organized crime boss Meyer Lansky, was nationalized by Fidel Castro. Today it's run by the Spanish chain Iberostar. But Lansky's family in the US say it's rightfully theirs, and they filed a claim for compensation. It's hard to find high-value land in Cuba that doesn't have a potential claim on it. Cruise ships that dock in Havana, airlines whose planes touch down in the capital, and hotel chains across the island could all be sued in US courts. There are already thousands of claims for expropriated property, which the US Department of Justice values at $9 billion, and more are expected.
You can try to mitigate or get around it.
Gregory Biniowski, a Canadian lawyer representing foreign firms in Cuba, says the sanctions violate international law.
Title III is egregiously extraterritorial because it's basically applying US law in US courts to foreign nationals with regards to something that didn't even happen in the United States. It's an affront to the sovereignty of most of the U.S. trading partners, because it's trying to use U.S. economic power and the U.S. court system to bully countries around the world for the U.S. to achieve foreign policy objectives in Cuba.
This building was once the Surf Hotel. It's been Graciela Valdez's home for the last half-century. The hotel was nationalised in the 1960s and the owner left for the United States, so there could potentially be a claim against her home.
Porque es un atropello. ¿Por qué me la van a quitar si a mí, mi gobierno, por el que estoy viviendo, por el que estoy luchando, porque me lo ha dado todo, desde los 17 años hasta la fecha, porque alguien que nunca dio nada viene a quitarme lo que dice hay que hacer? Yo soy cubana y me muero siendo cubana.
But she's confident that in her case at least, the new sanctions won't be enforceable.
Nosotros confiamos en la revolución y en el gobierno. Tranquilo.
I'm sorry, I should have told y'all about the Surf Hotel. That one. Yeah, I mean, it's a big old yikes. I mean, I know I'm always been accused of being, you know, a U.S. imperialist and a synthetic lefty. And now you know the rest of the story. So, yeah, I've been exposed. 'Twas only a matter of time. So, by the way, have you seen the protests, though, going down in Cuba right now? They're pretty wild. Oh, wait, that's Argentina. That's Argentina after they won a football match. Oh, Cuba, en estos momentos. Los cubanos quieren libertad. The Cubans want liberty. Cuba. Cuba libre. Cuba libre. Viva Cuba libre. Yeah. This isn't the only hoax, by the way, on the interwebs right now. There's so many. They were posting like revolutionary footage from Egypt, you know? That one was pretty weird. This one is equally strange. And the other scary thing about these is that they're working. Like, so many quote tweets. By the way, you know, props to everyone who's doing disinformation on these things. You'll notice that this actually had 2,000 quote tweets earlier. So that number has dropped considerably, because I think every single right-winger and liberal who's like been retweeting this is suddenly kind of getting blown out for it. And I'm like, oh, well, probably shouldn't be doing that. Can you also make note of the sanctions on Venezuela affecting the rest of most of the impact of Latin American Caribbean countries, Haiti, Cuba, El Salvador? Was Venezuelan being choked out? I couldn't help other nations like it had planned with acts like Petro-Caribe and others. Yeah, that's what we were just talking about when I was reading the Jacobin article. Something to the tune, I think, of $38 billion is how much it's been costing Venezuela, as well as the fact that like it strangles their economies and their ability to import and export oil, petroleum, stuff like that. I mean, it's kind of rich that the U.S. has accused Venezuela of, you know, being a socialist hellscape and not doing capitalism, when Venezuela is trying to do capitalism. They're trying to sell their oil on an international stage, and they're getting blocked from doing that. It's like, but we want a capitalism, daddy. Won't you let us capitalism? Ooh, woo. And the U.S. is like, no. This is socialism, and this is socialism failing on a worldwide stage. That's what's happening here.
Stock motion video.
So all in as of right now, and in terms of the quote unquote Cuban revolution that's taking place, here's a quick summation. Okay, there is groups of people who are protesting on the streets in Cuba. Those groups of people are being amplified by the U.S. media as being this entire revolutionary force that's trying to take down the Cuban government. There is also thousands upon thousands of people protesting on the streets in Cuba against U.S. imperialism, in favor of Fidel Castro. Those are not being amplified by the U.S. Media at all. If you don't believe me, here I will quickly show you some undoctored footage, even though I know no one's going to believe that this is undoctored footage. But, you know, this is just the world we live in. We'll just have to say that these are all a bunch of plants. So again, unless you want to tell me that this is just thousands and thousands of people who are just, plants from the CIA or something, no, there's obviously a very strong effort pushing back against American imperialism in the country on the ground. There's solidarity coming from a lot of other countries as well. Should also show some of the footage of the current president marching in the streets with everybody. So here's Miguel Diaz-Canel speaking in the streets. I'll try my best to translate it. Ahora mi español es muy malo, pero yo quiero estudiar un poco más. Mira.
Pero también hay un grupo de gente contrarrevolucionaria, mercenaria, pagada por el gobierno de los Estados Unidos, pagada indirectamente a través de agencias del gobierno norteamericano para armar este tipo de manifestación. En momentos cuando nosotros nos tenemos que estar centrando en cómo atendemos a los que están padeciendo, en cómo logramos capacidad de ingreso para todos los que empiezan a contraer la enfermedad, en cómo cortamos la transmisión, en cómo con lo poco que tenemos podemos dar bienestar. Y en medio de eso...
So he's basically claiming that there are like mercenary factions of the United States that are trying to infiltrate the Cuban people and try to make it seem as if there is a large counter-revolution taking place. Is the implication here. And again, keep in mind, everybody, there's a reason why the United States is taking so much time to jump all over this story, where they have been completely radio silent when it comes to Colombia, when it comes to all the violence taking place in Colombia, when it comes to police crackdowns in Colombia, when it comes to extrajudicial killings by the police of Colombian citizens, when it comes to beatings on the street by the police of Colombian citizens, because it is a far-right government in Colombia, and no one wants to call that out. Yeah, or, well, okay, the revolution that's going on right now in Haiti, that is anti-US. So there's thousands and thousands of people marching in the streets, but the United States doesn't want to talk about that. They don't want to show you footage of that because it's like, oh shit, no, they're not pro-US factions.
We talk now with Daniel Kovalik, International Human Rights Professor at Pittsburgh University. Welcome to From the South. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Oh, socialist audio.
Or Kovalik, can we see a parallel scenario between the situation now in Cuba and the scam used to try to pass supposed humanitarian aid to Venezuela in 2018? This is my first question.
Yeah, well, I think we see the same type of regime change tactics that the U.S., as you say, is used in Venezuela, is still using in Venezuela, is using in Nicaragua, is using in Cuba. The U.S. denies these countries access to very important goods, medicines, food, etc., and then it offers some minimal amount of humanitarian aid, so-called, in order to try to coax the people of these countries into overthrowing their governments. This is classic. In the case of...
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. So that was my point when I made that post, and the reason I haven't deleted it yet is you cannot simply say that anyone who's going to protest the government of these countries is a CIA plant, okay? Because that kind of takes away from people's agency, especially people who happen to be on the ground in these countries who may be suffering immensely. Why are they suffering immensely? They're suffering immensely in large part due to the United States embargoes on the country and their policies towards Cuba. The United States has been trying to force this to happen for a very, very long time. They're still trying to force this to happen. And even if there are crumbs of people who are upset, and they have a right to be, because at the end of the day, their economy is getting completely battered by the lack of tourism. There is no more influx of tourism coming into the country. So as that is the case, the United States is now jumping on this, being like, my God, do you see this? Do you see the revolution taking place? This is the Cuba that longs to be free, that longs to have the sweet embrace of capitalism, wash its leathery thighs. That is the future for all of them.
Venezuela, there was an internal...
They're not CIA plants. They're exploited by the US. That's it. That's all there is to it. You said it. That's the nuance that I was looking for. That's the nuance I want to have on the left. I don't just want 1,000 people on Twitter being like, every one of these people is a CIA plant. They're just like, what are you doing? You're making us look ridiculous. You're doing the thing again. And then when you do that, everyone's like, well, yeah, you're clearly an imperialist. This is the imperialist agenda.
U.S. government review, which in fact concluded that the humanitarian aid offered to Venezuela in 2018 was purely politically motivated for the purpose of regime change. And again, I think we're seeing similar things happening now in Cuba.
Against Cuba, are we seeing that?
This makes me feel good, all right? Just makes me, because my audio is so scuffed at the best of times, as is some of my transitions, you know? I'll randomly just be talking, and I'm like, yeah, and that's why this is a terrible, you know, they are basically in the middle of a cultural genocide, and oh shit, oh sorry, oh wait, fuck, we're doing it, okay, oh, hey, well, this room is actually very appropriate for what we're talking about. See, this was a good transition. This was a perfect transition. There you have it. But now I don't feel as bad just seeing that professional TV services have the same problems as me. So that's still a thing, you know. Here we are.
Is extreme sanctions against Cuba, which are causing deprivation and suffering.
This is another proof communism kills, and exactly why we have to keep Cuba under 839,492 sanctions and counting. Better COVID response, please. No, stop protesting. Yugoslav liberals. This meme says it all. Oh man, thank you. This summarizes my last 24 hours on Twitter. This is what my Twitter account has been like for the last little while. is these two factions both equally upset
Amongst the Cuban people. And now the U.S. is trying to blame Cuba for those problems. And it's trying to provoke an insurrection in that country. And we're seeing some of that come to fruition at present.
Does anyone, Political Puppy? Anymore?
Yes, we are listening. Professor Kowalik, are you listening to us?
Yes.
I have a next question for you.
This is so cute. I love the problems they're having. Searching Cuba results on Twitter recommendations that you follow, and they're all at CIA. Nothing suspicious going on here. Yeah, I mean, like, this is kind of devolving into the conspiratorial side of things.
President Joe Biden has asked Cuban government to listen its people, but what happened with U.S. government that every year ignores the world's petition to end the blockade?
Right. I mean, what the U.S. is doing is essentially coercing the Cuban people. What it's really saying, it's not really, the sanctions are not aimed at the Cuban government. They're aimed at the Cuban people. And what Biden is essentially saying...
Yeah, see, that's the biggest problem, I think, with just people throwing the CIA thing to the fact that it's become a meme. Like, if you respond to every tweet that someone makes with, like, the picture of the FBI guy on the computer or the picture of the CIA guy on the computer, or you just call every single person a gusano because they might point any of this out, then you're doing a disservice to the fact that the CIA does prop up and instill dictators around the world, continues to do so, and is doing everything in their power to fuck up Central and South America. Those are real things that happen. They should be talked about. They should be reported. Bread tubers, aka people on the YouTubes making videos, are not the front line of the CIA. I'm sorry to have to break that to you, you know? That they're not. They're not the only thing standing in the pathway to revolution. You know, communism is not on the verge, but you know, thanks to imperialist bread tube, it's unfortunately just falling apart. They're useful idiots. They can be. Everyone can be. Of course they can be. No question. You can't say the G word. Is it a slur on Twitch? Really? I'm not calling anyone that. I'm saying I've been called that. I don't know. Sounds like something the CIA would say. True. CIA king.
To the Cuban people is that unless they overthrow their government, these sanctions will continue and they will continue to suffer. The U.S. will settle for nothing but complete regime change in Cuba. That has been the position of the US government, whether under Republicans or Democrats, since the 1959 revolution.
Kovalik, thank you so much for your opinions, for Telesur, and your time also.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
I mean, knowing this stuff about COINTELPRO happen, it's natural to be a little paranoid. It's like, it's clownish and makes the left look ridiculous if you honestly start propping up the concept that BreadTube, which, by the way, BreadTube is not a collective. There's not a meeting of the BreadTube Council. There's no all hail the great bread that everyone prays to every single night. It's a group of content creators, most likely inspired by huge famous creators who, again, were very financially well off, like H Bomber Guy, Abigail, you know, you name it, and then taking that and then people being inspired to make their own videos, and then a Reddit thread, which, yes, that's where this all comes from. It's a Reddit thread called BreadTube, then amplifying voices. And in essence, the Reddit thread typically was trying to amplify smaller voices, smaller content creators. And that's what it is. To insinuate that that is some collective of CIA funded operatives to try and uphold US imperialism, when at worst it's a whole bunch of like debate bros at times who are just trying to fight for Medicare for all, but don't really care much about other global issues. They don't really care much about, material conditions, ending capitalism, the labor theory of value. That is a very fair thing you could levy at like what has become modern day BreadTube. Those are fair criticisms and, totally valid ones. If you go onto the far other end, the far other end where you're saying that they are actual CIA instigators and they're part of deep conspiracy theories that are trying to have certain people, aka Burger King, assassinated, yes, that is ridiculous. And again, it makes you look like a clown. It is so utterly clown shoes. Like like the thing with conspiracy theories is that the truth is honestly way more boring. It always is. Like, even the right-wing conspiracies, if you take Alex Jones, who likes to be like, there's a secret cabal of global elitists, and they're basically controlling the universe, and they're trying to do their best in order to control us all and put fluorescein in the water that's going to turn all the frogs into hyper-lesbian sexuals. Like, all this kind of stuff. It sounds like utter nonsense, and the truth of the matter is we know who controls the levers of power. We know who are both the richest individuals, the richest corporations on the planet, and we know where their interests lie. We know where the energy, sector of the world, what it does and how it tries to influence politics. We know the same thing about a variety of other industries. It's all laid out. We know who the top 100 richest human beings are on the planet. And in a lot of ways, we know what they do and do not do with their money. You do not need all these extra conspiracy theories painted around it. Again, most breadtubers, YouTubers, they're just people trying to make a living off becoming a YouTube person in politics. That's it. They may not talk about the things you like, but they're not funded by the CIA on the behalf of the American government to try and sow disinformation and create rifts and all that kind of shit. Like, that's again why you're going off into the far side. The far side.
To help Cuba, the first thing that should be done is to suspend the embargo on Cuba. As most countries of the world are requesting. That would truly be a humanitarian gesture. No country in the world should be besieged, blockaded.
Just so everyone knows, the UN General Assembly has called for the US to end the Cuban embargo for 29 consecutive years. 29. Of the countries, everyone voted in favor, the exceptions being the US and Israel. That's it.
That is the most contrary thing to human rights.
Eso es lo más contrario que puede haber a los derechos humanos.
What was the point of the embargoes and the blockades? Well, I mean, it was originally pitched as a way of fighting the commies. Ultimately, right? They were up until Obama, they were labeled as a terrorist or an organization that was embedding terrorism. And I know simply by saying this out loud, I'm going to invite the neoliberals into the chat who are now going to say, "But the missile crisis." In the modern era, continuing that embargo on Cuba has done nothing but put a stranglehold on their economy. And if you want to posture, if you want to be an American and clutch your pearls and say that we cannot aid an authoritarian regime like Cuba by doing trade with them, how do you explain Saudi Arabia? How do you explain selling billions of dollars to Saudi Arabia every single year? How do you explain buying fuck tons and fuck tons of oil from Saudi Arabia? If that's truly the stance you want to take, like, at least be honest about your convictions.
And it has to be the Cuban people who decide, because Cuba is a free, independent, and sovereign country. There should be no intervention.
Well, to thank everyone who have been with us in these last weeks, which has been difficult days and also glory days, because we have been sharing with our people the results of our vaccine candidates.
Telesur, I gotta be completely honest with you. The audio quality on every clip I've tried to watch so far has been so unbelievably scuffed. And I disagree with people who push forward the narrative that Telesur is just like communist propaganda. I think they do very important reporting from on the ground, but at the same time, it's very difficult for me to use in my streams. It's a small complaint.
To evaluate in individuals vaccinated how the immune response can neutralize, can fight these strains. So,
okay, so I want to read two threads which both explain a little bit which is going on. Both individuals have done quite a thorough deep dive, and this is going to be the ultimate in both sidisms, because I have the sock dems pushing forth the narrative that all things are not perfect within the current regime, and to simply say things like this is 100% the fault of America is ignoring what is going on the ground. And at the same time, we've got another individual who goes by the name of Glad Empanati, who has also put together a small collection of facts to explain how detrimental the US blockades truly are, even if the idea in the modern era is that, well, they don't necessarily prevent food imports, so how can we blame things like starvation on the Cuban people? So, to understand what's really going on in Cuba right now, the massive protests across the country, you have to grasp three things. One, the Leninist government's years-long crisis of legitimacy. Two, the cause of recent hyperinflation. Three, the mixed politics of dissidents. This has been a slow-burning crisis for years. Fidel himself was legitimately popular. Raul less so, and Diaz-Canel not at all. Opposition to the party tends to be an ironic mess. Resentment about one-party state, shading into anti-communism, and resentment about austerity. The reason the government has been imposing austerity in recent years, cutting state services, privatizing parts of the economy, opening up large foreign-focused hotel sectors, was partly the hope of pulling in China and partly a scheme of getting dollars to imports via tourism. Imports are important because it's a small island. Cuba's never been able to sustain itself purely by its own industries and needed to import food, oil, machines, and other resources. On paper, the government was trying to reverse this. In practice, Cuba's position has worsened consistently. Sources. This brings us to the direct point, the cause of the current hyperinflation. Cubans are suffering enormously right now from shortages and massively increased prices in basic goods and services. This is actually what all the protests are immediately about. Why? A typical left take in the US, the cause of the inflation is the embargo. Now, the embargo doesn't help. It blocks a major export market, the US, which could help provide Cuba a lot of money for imports, but decades old and thus around last year, hyperinflation wasn't what changed. The truth is, Cuba suffered from a perfect storm of two nasty shocks resulting from a balance of payment crisis. The first was COVID, which radically increased the need for imports, totally out of the government's control, but the second was the choice for the dual currency system. I forgot the crisis legitimacy stuff. Here's the link. There's a lot going on and a lot of jargons. Let me explain. Inflation is a general and continuous rise in prices. Prices go up when the costs are up because the firms in the first instance set the prices as a markup over the costs. When costs across the economy go up and stay up, prices must be raised. A balance of payment crisis is, to oversimplify, when a country can't pay for key imports, or when imports suddenly get more expensive, and or imports, exports, and or country's currency depreciates against foreign currencies and uses it for imports, all tend to go together. The significance of the dual currency is to explain and probably requires its own thread, but in many ways, the fulcrum point is that the entire crisis, I'll try to be succinct, would not be as in-depth as I'd like to apologize if it's confusing. Basically, any country can issue as much of it wants of its own currency circulated through the economy to accomplish particular goals, e.g. paying people to build a road or a bridge, and receive it back in taxes. Inflation is not really tied to the amount of money circulating, but if a country ever needs imports, it must use other countries' currency to pay. It might pay for countries X products using X cash. Realistically, though, it will use one of the four reserve currencies, dollar, euro, yen, or a pound, used in basically all international relations. It does not issue the currencies itself. They are, unlike its own currency, scarce. It doesn't print them, it has to hoard them. Usually it gets them by exporting goods and services, priced in the currency it needs. This foreign currency is called foreign exchange, or forex. While this money talk, check out the basic biophysical structure of the Cuban economy. Centuries of colonization that created a crash crop plantation economy and limited arable land equals a country that can't feed itself. What are the top imports? The prices have soared. The last time Cuba had a BOP crisis was during the special period in the 90s after the fall of the USSR, which was its major trading partner. The currency collapsed, legal imports became impossible, the black market dollars or forex circulated freely, and they were used for domestic payments. In that context, the party created a dual currency system that was essentially a way of hovering up what then carefully rationing the forex. This rationing system of the forex persisted until 2020 when it phased out before the pandemic struck. This worked and was complicated, and I've been trying to avoid getting into it, but I suppose I have to a bit. We'll link to resources. The very short answer is that there are two pesos, the local peso and the forex peso. The local peso could buy staple goods within the Cuban economy. The forex peso theoretically could be an exchange with the dollar, and so it could also buy imports. Imports that is chosen at the discretion of the person holding the forex peso. Most of Cubans' food was of course imported, but the government would do these imports and reprice the food in local pesos so people could buy them using those. Forex pesos were for individual inputs and luxuries. Most Cubans were paid in local pesos, meaning they could only buy goods and prices within it. A few strategic sectors, state firm, export firms, tourism, were partly and wholly due to forex pesos, which let them buy whatever imports they wanted or needed of. The logic, these sectors either require imported parts and materials for their production, produces forex revenues via exports, hence they need some state forex directives or incentives. Now, this is a twisted system in many ways. Many Cubans had one foot in each peso. Some Cubans used skillful skills that only paid in local pesos, like engineers, and they would switch to arguably silly and foreign-focused jobs the state paid in forex pesos for things like tour guides. Finally, individuals, not firms, holding forex pesos were not actually buying things from international markets directly. The convertibility was then nominal. Instead, they would use them in state-run import stores where the government had decided what luxuries would buy and peg them at a one-to-one to the dollar, cost about as much as the forex the government had spent in it. What this means is that the dual currency system was in a way for the state to retain total control over the forex. They were the ones who had almost all the real dollars in the Cuban economy, and then they rationed mostly partial and occasionally actual access to these dollars, and hence foreign purchasing power to only those who approved of through payment forex pesos. This is a widely despised system, both because of its complexity and authoritarianism, but from a purely technical point of view, the dual currency system actually did work for something very important. Something so important that when it was removed, this essentially precipitated the inflationary crisis. It kept the exchange rate stable. It stabilized Cuba's exchange rate, making imports predictable and cheap by keeping dollars into the country, forex outflows making forex more expensive, and preventing people from spending them on imports without approval. It also did this while insinuating the local peso from convertibility requirements. That basically mean Cuba would spend as many as local pesos as it wanted to and needed on the infrastructure. So I know this is an information dump, and now all of you are like, my brain is swimming in information right now. This might be a little bit, oh, thank you very much for the raid. Thank you. KF Logan 1875. We're just explaining Cuba and what exactly is going on there. So I'm now going to do my due diligence. Okay. And it's not this. It's not this. Don't worry. Don't worry. But here's the thing. To say single-handedly that the only cause of the troubles in Cuba happened to be the embargo and only the embargo would be disingenuous. It is one part of the puzzle. It is not the only part. That doesn't explain the entire story, however. Well, at the same time, we do have to explain what is going on the ground. And also, to all the right-wing and liberal, and let's be honest, neoliberal on both sides, posturing that Cuba is this absolute abysmal wasteland and the results are single-handedly because of communism. Communism has destroyed them. It destroys every country that it sets foot in. I'm not going to talk about China. Let's talk about a few quick things. Cuba, all right? Well, it doesn't have home ownership in the same way the United States does, because technically the homes are owned by the state. It also does not have homelessness in the same way the United States does, because every single Cuban is given a home. Now, where things get very, very tricky in Cuba is if you want to, say, move to another area because you have to do so for a job or something like that, you actually essentially have to do what is kind of like a bartering system in a video game, where you have to exchange housing with other members in open boards, things of that nature. So there's no question that there are things that are wrong. The other thing that you should also point out when it comes to America versus the abysmal state of Cuba, or however they want to posture, is healthcare, because that is something that Americans suffer greatly from, is their complete lack of healthcare, because of the profit motive that has driven the insurance companies, made them all powerful, the pharmaceutical industries that have made them all powerful, and their lobbying firms that continue to push back against decided movements in the US like Medicare for All, things like this, right? But let's also explain what exactly the US is doing at the same time. And now we're going to look to Vlad Empanati. The Cuba social media astroturfing started from a Spain-based account that tweeted 5 times per second, with 1,500 other automated accounts retweeting that these need to get them trending. In terms of astroturfing, okay, I saw a lot of stuff from the left saying that at the end of the day, of course, when it comes to Cuba, what is going on is it's a CIA operative. Every single one of these protesters is funded by the CIA or the crisis actors or some combination of the two. Whereas the austerity measures imposed on by the United States, basically that embargo is creating a lot of the economic woes that you see within Cuba in part, and part of that is leading to austerity within the country, which of course is leading to instability, which of course is by design what the United States is doing. They don't need to pay thousands of crisis actors to march on the streets when their own embargoes are effectively doing the same thing. So cut through that narrative. Those are people who are terminally LARPing online, and the fact that they are calling me a Gusano just for pointing that out really speaks volume. Because I love the idea of, you know, privileged suburban kids in California with, you know, the communist symbol in their name being like, well, the fact that you don't acknowledge that every single one of these is a CIA plant means that you are in fact a Gusano and you're a Fed. One of the two, or a combination therein, okay? Whereas there is what I would consider to be astroturfing, 100% astroturfing, and it's being done online. It's being done online by a lot of these bot accounts who are like pushing out so much propaganda right now, like so much propaganda, and all of that propaganda happens to be, like, a lot of it is lies. They've been showing footage from Argentina saying that this is the Cuban Revolution. They've been showing footage from Miami saying this is the Cuban, like, sorry, not even online. I think CNN did that. CNN showed a picture of like a whole bunch of people waving American flags and Cuban flags and being like, you know, the revolution is here, the anti-communist revolution, and you're like, that's fucking Miami. That's goddamn Miami. What the fuck are you doing? So the massively disproportionate international attention given to these protests is a result of a PR company from Spain running a bot network. Those tweets were then picked up and spread by right-wing influencers after the bots got trending. The poster of this thread noted the accounts were originating from the trending hashtag that are also constantly involved in other such social media ops across the Spanish-speaking world. I found out about this by reading the Venezuelan government's tanky propaganda outlet Telesur.
por la represión que hay con el pueblo, que nos tienen matándonos de hambre, toda La Habana entera se está derrumbando y estamos sin casa, sin nada, tienen dinero para construir hoteles, para construir de todo, y a nosotros nos tienen pasando hambre y tremendo trabajo.
The US embargo on Cuba is much worse than it seems at first glance. People always say, sure, it's okay that it stops trade with the US alone, but Cuba can still trade with the rest of the world, and medicine and food are exempt, but it's not nearly that simple. Here's a thread on it. First, the US is Cuba's natural geographical trading partner. It's a massive economy right next to Cuba's tiny island. It's by default put at a massive disadvantage comparing it to its neighbors due to this alone, but that's why I'm making this thread. The US enforces the embargo extrajudicially as much as possible. How? Well, first, the US is the world's financial center. To trade with Cuba, a company needs to have no assets in the US whatsoever, and these will be at the risk of seizures and freezes for breaking the embargo. Now, if you were a multinational company and you had to choose between access to the US, the world's biggest economy, and its financial hub, or Cuba, a tiny island nation, which would you choose? Obviously, the vast majority choose the US, and this is part of why the embargo's design. This is the most important part because I see people pushing back on the internet a lot saying like, well, this doesn't directly affect the Cuban people because there's no embargo on food imports. There's no embargo on like medicine imports, okay? So this is all of their own design. And it's like, this is a massive, massive caveat that if you have any assets, if your company wants to trade with the US, needs to have no assets whatsoever. That is monstrous. That by default will, like, I would say, ban the majority of corporations from doing trade with them. But wait, there's more. Any cargo vessel that stops in Cuba cannot stop in the USA for 6 months. Since both countries are right next to each other, most shipping companies avoid Cuba due to this. So it's much harder for Cuba to even secure transports on imports and exports. But hey, let's say that these companies that literally do no business in the US at all, no financial assets, no operations, etc. Don't worry, the US targets them too. To try and decentivize trade with Cuba, their executives are banned from the US and their assets are seized and frozen. US bans Canadian mining executives over companies' investment to Cuba. Spain's Molina says CEO banned from US over hotels in Cuba. You might ask, well, why don't these companies just create subsidiaries to trade with Cuba then? The embargo specifically targets subsidiaries too, pushing the parent company for its operations, so that isn't possible. And what about those food and medical exemptions? In practice, they barely even exist. They're intentionally as unclear as possible to create legal uncertainty, making most companies decide not to deal with them at all, and those that want to try anyway have their own shipments vetoed. So in practice, shipping medicine or food to the US to Cuba is so prohibitively difficult that very few companies bother to do it. This is 100% intended and always has been from the point of view of the exemption is PR, so the US can say, but we allowed food and medicine on paper. You can clearly see the embargo covers far more than what it just seems at first glance. It is designed to systemically discourage all global trade with Cuba by leveraging the US's dominant international economic position to punish anyone who ever thinks about it. So yes, absolutely 100% the US is at fault here for their, again, stranglehold on both the Cuban economy and ultimately resulting in other countries and companies not wanting to even like feign interest in dealing with this. So when we talk about this, we have to mention the embargoes. There's a reason why, again, for 29 years in a row, the UN and every other country who's a part of it have voted to stop this. There's a reason. It is a humanitarian issue. And every single country agrees, the exception being the United States and Israel. That's it. So if you want to say, like, you know how that meme is going around all over the place right now? You know, the Eric Andre meme, like, why would socialism do this? It is partially true. Like, the United States absolutely trying to destroy other countries and prevent them from participating in global economic trade, while at the same time preventing other countries from having any ability to do imports or exports with those nations, yes, directly results in them failing.
Hey, do you like movies? Do you like Serfs? Do you want movies and Serfs watching the movies? So then come over to the new channels. It's the Serfs the cinema. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Can you do the thing, that thumbs up and comment and all those things that help us out in the algorithm that controls every aspect of our lives? Also, if you happen to have a Facebook account, can you delete it? Like just delete it. You should probably delete your Facebook account because it's not a great company. But hey, if you can't do that for whatever reason, I understand. And could you also go to facebook.com/thesurftimes then and give us a little like and a follow. We're just trying to push back against the fact that people like Ben Shapiro happen to dominate the platform entirely. And when everyone asks why do older generations believe the things they believe, one of the problems is the majority of them on social media use Facebook. So to counter that, we're just going to be on there too now. Also, if you happen to have a union or a worker co-op or even a leftist project, podcast, website, Zoom, MySpace, it doesn't matter. We will advertise it for free on this channel. All you got to do is go to weareserfs.com and use the forms that we got there, weareserfs.com. Thanks, everybody.
To our gods, Xander Corbis and VK Jehanam, we are prepared to commit human sacrifices for your eternal glory. To our monarchs, the Tim Caucus and Tom Spiker, we are humbled to be your oafish jesters, clowning around in your royal court. To our lords, Evan Nudie, Tofox, Ryan Lubin, Trevor R., Jeff Lamb, and Alexander Thaler, we shall proudly carry your standard onto the battlefield and die for your precious land. To our esteemed Knights of the Round Table, Dark Puppy, Jenna Towell, Anna Loves Riley, Quiet 185, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, Multimondi, Trevor Janis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojak, Saren 42, Chronic to Hemphog, The Great Pudini, Bone Genie, Catherine, Radical Maniac, Ramona Costa, J. Fraser Cartwright, Jimmy Bignuts, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Yopi, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our glass, we raise our swords, and we salute you.